You ever had someone tell you what you can or can't park in your own driveway? Well, imagine waking up to find a bright, orange slip taped to your door. An HOA fine for the truck you've owned and used for years. That's how my story began. With a petty piece of paper that turned into a full-on war. It was a Monday morning when I spotted it. The HOA claimed my work truck was an eyesore and lowered community value. Never mind that my neighbor's peeling pink shutters looked like they'd survived a tornado, or that someone down the street had a rusted basketball hoop leaning like the Tower of Pisa. No, apparently my truck was the villain. At first I laughed. I thought it was a mistake. I even called Patricia, our self-appointed HOA president, with a permanent scowl and said, "Hey, you sure this wasn't meant for someone else?" She didn't laugh. Instead, she doubled down. "Your vehicle doesn't meet community standards. If it's not gone in a week, expect more fines." That's when the frustration started boiling. I work long hours. My truck isn't just a vehicle, it's my livelihood. It hauls equipment, carries lumber, and keeps food on the table. And suddenly, some clipboard warrior decided it wasn't pretty enough. I paid no mind at first. Then the letters came, one after another. Escalating fines stacked higher than my toolbox. My wife looked at me one night across the dinner table and said, "They're not going to stop." She was right, and that's when the idea struck me. Not to fight them the usual way, but to give them something far bigger to complain about. If they thought my truck was an eyesore, wait until they saw what I had planned. The very next weekend, I called up an old buddy who owned a farm outside town. "You still got that old tractor?" I asked. His laugh crackled through the phone. "You want to borrow it?" "For what?" I just grinned. "For teaching my HOA a lesson." By Sunday afternoon, the neighborhood had a new attraction. A full-sized tractor parked right on my front lawn, gleaming in the sun like a middle finger to their so-called rules. Kids pointed, neighbors gawked, and Patricia nearly fainted when she drove past. The war had begun, and I wasn't backing down. By Monday morning, the tractor had become the most talked-about landmark in the neighborhood. People slowed their cars just to stare. Some even took pictures, like my lawn had turned into a roadside attraction. I'll admit, the sight of Patricia's jaw, practically hitting the steering wheel when she passed by, was worth every ounce of trouble. But trouble was coming, and fast. At 9 a.m., there was a knock on my door so sharp it rattled the glass. I opened it to find Patricia herself, clipboard clutched like a sword, and 2 board members flanking her like bodyguards. "This," she snapped, pointing to the tractor in my yard, "is a violation of at least 6 HOA rules." I leaned against the door frame, calm as ever. "Good morning to you too. Care for some coffee?" She didn't smile. "This isn't funny. Remove that machine immediately or face legal action." I crossed my arms, playing it cool. "Funny thing, you said my truck was an eyesore. This is just lawn decoration. I've named it Big Red. It's staying." Her face turned the color of ripe tomatoes. "You're mocking this association." "Absolutely," I replied. "And I'm just getting started." That was the moment I realized the neighbors were listening. A small crowd had gathered at the sidewalk, whispering and chuckling. Patricia noticed too. Her voice got shrill. "You're setting a terrible example for this community. What's next? Livestock in the yard?" Now, I won't lie. The idea did cross my mind. The board threatened me with fines so high they could have bought a brand new tractor. Letters poured in daily, each one angrier than the last. But something strange started happening. My neighbors, quiet, folks who usually kept to themselves, began stopping me in the driveway, shaking my hand, saying things like, "About time someone stood up to them." Turns out, I wasn't the only one sick of Patricia's reign of terror. The tractor wasn't just a symbol of defiance, it was rallying the whole street. One night, my buddy Dave from 3 houses down brought over a 6-pack and said, "Man, you're a legend. But careful, she's got lawyers on speed dial." I took a long sip and grinned. Let her call them. I've got plans of my own. Because while Patricia thought this was about one truck, I was already preparing to turn her obsession into her downfall. She wanted a battle of rules? Fine. I'd show her how rules could be twisted against her. And trust me, she never saw what was coming next. The next move was surgical. I started digging through the HOA bylaws like a detective hunting for a loophole. Each clause a breadcrumb. You'd be surprised how many rules they wrote years ago and then forgot. About ambiguous language, vague enforcement policies, and a glaring lack of consistency. I printed every relevant page and made notes in the margins. Knowledge, I realized, was my real horsepower. One clause, in particular, caught my eye. The definition of commercial vehicle. It was embarrassingly vague. Trucks were singled out, but farm equipment was never mentioned. Dusty exception about seasonal agricultural displays sat buried 2 pages down. That footnote? The one they never used. I photographed it and smiled. This was the chink in their armor. Armed with photocopies and quiet confidence, I started talking to neighbors. Not the loud, accusatory kind of talk. They were tired of that, but calm conversations. Over fences and at the mailbox, I explained what I'd found. People listened. When you hand someone a clear reason to stand up, they'll often do exactly that. By the end of the week, 5 households had signed a simple petition, demanding consistent enforcement of rules across the board, not personalized vendettas. Patricia responded by escalating. She sent a formal notice threatening towing and a hearing with the board. I showed up anyway, not because I was naive, but because I wanted witnesses. The meeting room was stuffy and fluorescent, and Patricia sat at the head like a brittle crown. She read her carefully scripted complaint, and when it came to the tractor, she sputtered about precedent and aesthetics. The crowd, neighbors, friends, and a guy with a camera from the local paper was not impressed. I stood and spoke, and direct. I pointed to the bylaws, to the ignored footnote, to the hypocrisy of enforcement. I asked for clarity. Write down what a commercial vehicle is so the whole community knows. It was a simple request. Patricia bristled, then snapped at the board to vote. To her surprise, half the room raised hands in support. The vote was procedural, but the message was loud. People were done with arbitrary fines. That night, the talk at barbecues and on porches shifted. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about fairness. The tractor had been a catalyst, turning private frustration into public scrutiny. And once the community's attention was focused, momentum gathered like wind behind a sail. I went home that evening and walked past Big Red, sunlight catching its metal like a promise. I wasn't just fighting a fine anymore, I was changing the conversation in the neighborhood. Patricia's next move would be critical, and I was ready for it. Soon enough, what began as a stubborn stunt became a full-blown neighborhood movement. The following week, the tension reached its peak. Patricia, realizing she was losing control, went full nuclear. She sent a certified letter threatening legal action, fines, and even community service. Penalties for anyone participating in my so-called tractor protest. Her tone was furious, almost Shakespearean in its over-the-top villainy. But by this point, I had already anticipated her moves. I calmly printed copies of every interaction, every violation, and every ambiguous rule she had tried to enforce. I even documented the tractor on the lawn, strategically photographing it in ways that highlighted its harmlessness. It wasn't just a tractor anymore, it was evidence. When she delivered her letter to my door, I smiled, invited her in for coffee, and waved a copy of my folder. This, I said, is everything your HOA has done to me. Now let's talk. She sputtered, trying to regain authority, but I had the floor. I outlined her overreach, the inconsistent enforcement of rules, and the petition that half the neighborhood had signed. I explained politely but firmly that her threats were now on record, and that any lawsuit could easily backfire. The room, or rather the lawn, because Patricia was pacing like a caged animal, felt electric. Neighbors peeked from windows whispering in approval. The best part? Patricia realized she had no allies left. The board had started quietly distancing themselves, unwilling to be dragged into another fight. Her authority had crumbled, replaced with awkward smiles and hesitant glances. By Friday, I received a formal notice that the HOA had dropped all fines and acknowledged that my tractor was permissible under current community regulations. Essentially, Big Red had won me the battle without ever leaving the yard. I couldn't help but chuckle as I read it aloud to my wife. We toasted with beer, standing on the porch, looking at the tractor that had become the neighborhood's symbol of quiet defiance. But the story didn't end there. Patricia, in her last-ditch attempt to assert control, tried to remove a neighbor's harmless garden statue. She was met with a polite but firm refusal. By then, people had learned the lesson. The HOA could no longer intimidate us with arbitrary rules. The tractor was more than a machine. It was a turning point. Weeks later, I heard rumors that the board had quietly revised their rules, clarifying vehicle policies and enforcement procedures, and quietly sidelining Patricia. She still lived in the community, but her power had evaporated like morning fog. Meanwhile, Big Red stayed on my lawn, a testament to patience, strategy, and a little bold audacity. In the end, it wasn't just about parking a tractor. It was about standing up, using the rules smartly, and showing that sometimes the best way to win is to turn the absurdity of bureaucracy against itself. And that, my friends, is how one tractor taught an entire HOA a lesson they won't forget. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next HOA showdown.